Okay, it's 12 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. First, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I have requests to pull item 2.7, 2.9, 2.10, and 2.12. Are there any other items? Councillor Usher.
Madam Chair, I'd like to pull 2.6 as well as those that you mentioned. And I have a small question on 2.11.
Okay, just a question. We can keep it in the group, or you want it pulled?
I think my question could be answered, so if you could keep it in the group, if I could jump to the page fast enough.
Okay, anything else anyone would like pulled? Councillor Van Holst.
Sorry if anybody mentioned these, but I think 2.3 and 2.8.
Okay, and did you want them pulled or just comments and questions?
I had some maybe more in-depth questions about those. And
Okay.
I think I can just, okay, those are it.
Okay. So we'll prepare a motion for 2.1, 2.2, 2.4, 2.5, 2.11, 2.13. Go ahead with your point of order. I probably was about to get to it, but go for it.
Madam Chair, do non-committee members get to pull items?
So in my opinion as the chair, the intent of pulling an item is because that you may want to vote differently than the staff recommendation. And so if a non-committee member feels that they can enter the debate and potentially persuade the discussion to a vote separate than just voting as per the staff recommendation, I'm fine with pulling it separate. In practice, in my experience, members are pulling items and still intend to vote with the staff recommendation, therefore they don't need to be pulled. But in this case, should the member or non-member wish to pull an item and may feel that the discussion, debate, or questions may influence the decision of committee, it should be pulled and not part of consent. That's my ruling. You're welcome to challenge it.
I'm still trying to filter through your ruling.
The only reason things should be pulled out of consent is if you intend to vote separately or persuade the committee to vote separately. If you have questions or comments, it can stay in consent and we can deal with them one by one, but we only need one vote. Yes, so the motion for 2.1, 2.2, 2.4, 2.5, 2.11, and 2.13 will be on the floor. Councillor Usher. Councillor Hubert to second. Thank you. And we can open up that vote. Oh, sorry, are there any comments on those items before we open that vote? Sorry, that's okay. So comments on, go ahead, Councillor Usher.
I don't know if there's another one to pull there. I'll give way to Councillor Park if she wants to pull another one.
Thank you. I apologize for my tardiness. I was in competition for an elevator spot. We all know how busy it is at noon around here. I just wanted to clarify, so we've pulled at this point 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, is that correct? No?
No, the items that have been pulled so far are 2.3, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9.
Those are all great to be pulled, and I would have pulled them myself, but I'd like to comment on 2.4 when...
Now is your opportunity, Councillor.
Great. I just wanted to speak, pardon me.
Would you just tell the councillor that I just made her, give her opportunity to pull if she wanted to pull, but it's my turn to make my comment before her.
Very good. Go ahead, Councillor Usher, with your comments on the consent items.
Sorry, I had the floor and she didn't realize it. Madam Chair, with respect to 2.11, I just want to make sure I have the right one. Yeah. I have a couple of quick questions. One of them is to do with through you to staff with respect to the specification for materials for this type of bid. Do we specify the specifications for the materials? And I guess Ms. Chair knows, probably Mr. Sola knows why I'm asking this, because we're having a lot of problems down in my ward with respect to some of the streets that we've used certain material and they're deteriorating much, much faster than I anticipated.
Through you, Madam Chair, 211 is related only to the selection of engineering consultants, so this would not apply to any design standards, specifications, or materials at this point. That would be part of individual project assignments where we would be asking them to use that consultant to follow specs.
Okay, my other question is to do with the Canadian European Union Comprehension Economic Trade Agreement, CETA. I am assuming that part of the scenario here is that we could have consultants from Europe bidding for these positions, am I right?
Through you, Madam Chair, it is correct that CETA does enable consultants from Europe to bid on Canadian projects, as it does enable Canadian consultants to bid in Europe as well.
We may not have them at the beginning, but we might have them pouring in a few years from now. My last question is to do with on page 136 on the Independent Fairness Commissioner review. Are we saying that HKA is the commissioner? We use the word commissioner in the second to last line before we got to the quotation, and we use Bill Moxon from the firm of HK. Is he a commissioner? Is this what we're talking about? Because this is the only place that we talk about a commissioner.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much. That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to Councillor Park.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about 2.4 for a moment and talk about the success we've seen in the pay by app in the parking, and not only downtown, but Old East Village and elsewhere in the city where there's public paid parking. I've heard a lot of positive feedback about the ease of using this service for individuals who are looking to work, shop, or play in areas where they need to drive a car. And also the fact that people are avoiding a lot of money when it comes to parking fine revenue. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to provide that feedback to staff. It's been a good project, and seeing a 16% reduction in fines. I know it's not great on the revenue side of things, but it sure is good on the community side of things. So thank you to staff on that.
Okay, I'll look to committee for any other comments on the consent items. Councillor Van Holst.
Perhaps you correct me, I don't think, did we pull 212?
Yes, 212 was pulled.
Okay, I'll save my comments till then.
Seeing no other comments on the consent items, we'll put them on the floor and let some of these good staff get on with their day. And the mover for that, you already have. Okay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, 2.3 was pulled. I believe Councillor Van Holst. I'll look to you for your questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So a couple of questions through you about, let's talk about our choice. My first question was regarding the bike lanes that we're installing in this intersection, and I know that although we do have bike lanes on the east side of Highbury, there aren't any on the west side, and in the, I think in the master plan for that part of the corridor, bike lanes aren't contemplated either. So I wanted to ask staff about the inclusion of those.
Ms. Scher, Mr. Soldo?
Actually, Mr. McRae's going to answer that question.
Thank you. Through the chair. The councillor is correct. Bike lanes exist to the east, not contemplated to the west, because it is a very constrained corridor. But the Highbury Avenue north-south corridor is seen as a barrier. So this project is planned to provide an opportunity to help cyclists get across Highbury through this intersection, and then get into the surrounding grid type network in order to reach further destinations to the west.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand how that would work. What happens when they cross through the intersection?
Through the chair, if a cyclist is coming from the east, they would use this intersection as a crossing point. Just get onto the west side of Highbury Avenue and then turn north into the local street network to the north of Hamilton Road.
Okay, thank you. My next question was regarding the costs for property acquisition. And do we have that broken out between the properties that we'll have to buy partially and those we'll have to buy wholly? Because I think that when we buy the houses and have to buy them, buy the entire property, there's a redevelopment potential and there's some potential for recuperating some of this revenue that wouldn't be the case if we're just expropriating a little strip of land. I also think that in the future, as we do more of this, where there's certainly property impacts in some of the other parts of the city, for instance, the BRT, I think we need to be looking at what can we do with this and how much can we recover, because there's something more to this than just a regular property impact.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. It is broken down between partial acquisition and full acquisition. But what we don't have here is the cost or the revenue to be generated in the future when we consolidate the properties. Because at this time, you don't know what the highest and best use is for those properties. So to put a number for that would be extremely difficult. There would be land use implications and we'd have to go through zoning. So at the present time, I believe, and Mr. McCrae can correct me, it is only for the acquisition of the properties, not for any future potential use.
Okay, thank you. And maybe if I may, Madam Chair, just one point that would help understand the report. When we're looking at the cross sections, it doesn't say which direction we're looking, and so that might be helpful in these. I noticed that I think the ones on Highbury, or the ones on Hamilton Road, they're both looking east, and then I think the ones on Hamilton Road, they're both looking east, and ones on Highbury may both be looking north. But if that was pointed out, it would just be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. So is there any debate on that item, Councillor, or just the questions?
No, I'll point out that was, maybe I could ask, the final price was certainly higher than our original estimate. I don't know if the staff wants to comment on that.
Looking to staff, do you have any comments on the estimated price and the final price?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. At the beginning, when we were looking at this, it wasn't intended to be buying properties, and that is the driving cost. Here is about $4.1 million. So we're always looking to find solutions that can increase capacity without having those sort of social impacts. But at this location, given the constraints and the grading, that's really what's driving the cost here. And that'll have to be taken into account as we move forward through our development charges process.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think some very good work done here. This looks like it'll be a very big improvement to the traffic flow that we'll have, and certainly set us up well for the future when we do upgrades to Hamilton Road to the east. I think this is going to serve us well. So I hope it goes forward.
Thank you. Councillor Park.
Thank you, and I thank the councillor for bringing up some of the points of concern about the budget implications, and I think that recognizing what real estate prices have been doing in London is going up, and I can see how a budget bubble like that would certainly become part of it. And I think that looking at the overall effectiveness of the project, this intersection in particular plays a big responsibility with the transportation network in London connecting south to north London, east to west. So I think this project is very much needed. And looking down lower on the page, on page 19, talking about the efficiencies of coordinating the underground work with the intersection work, I'll say, for a cost savings of $1.3 million is nothing to be sneezed at either. So important work that has to be done, important investment that the city has to make, and look forward to progress on this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out to the councillor that the direction of north is on each of the diagram. So we know the direction that we're looking at. If you look at the top right-hand corner, you'll see the north for two of them, and otherwise north, south, east, and west are at the bottom right-hand corner in the other one. So perhaps he missed that. Anyway, I'm glad that Councillor Park mentioned some of the things that she mentioned, because I was going to talk about some of those. I do have one question in addition to all of that, though. Did we consider a roundabout at this intersection at any point in time? Through you to staff, because I didn't see anything that talked about a roundabout.
Mr. Soldor or Mr. McCrae?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. Basically, at any intersection improvement that we look at, we do look at roundabouts. For intersections that have lower volumes, we would look at that in a lot more detail. In this particular location, just given the mass of volume that we have going through here, when you analyze a roundabout, unless it would be a 3-lane roundabout in every direction, it really would not work very well. There's a certain point when a roundabout doesn't work from a functional perspective, and this is one of the highest intersections we have in terms of turning volumes and as well as through volumes, and we determined it was not feasible at this location.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor?
Yeah, I thought so, but I wanted to hear staff because there's been a lot of talk about this over the weekend, and I wanted to put that to rest. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hulst?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One final question. We did some outreach to the businesses, the Esso and the Petro-Canada, and I note now that the Petro-Canada has closed their doors forever. I'm wondering if that was a result of our conversations about these changes or not.
Madam Chair, certainly we wouldn't want to speculate on why a business has chosen not to remain in business. This project is some time off, so I imagine they have factors that drive that decision.
Thank you.
Okay, can I get a mover and a seconder for this item? Moved by Hubert, seconded by Usher, and we'll get it up on screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. The next item that was pulled was 2.6, and I'll look to the member who pulled the item. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions on this, and I'll ask the easy one first and the more difficult one after. They don't come consecutively. The $400,000, which is the anticipated costs, have we considered asking the province to fund this? Is there any program at all? And I mean fund it in total, considering what it is. It's their work really that we are taking on from my perspective.
Through the chair to the councillor, about a year ago, we had these discussions with the province, potentially at a cost sharing. At the present time, they are aware of our request. Inside the report itself, we are assuming that it's going to be 100% city funded, but the province may consider funding a portion of this. We haven't worked out those details at this time.
Thank you very much. And my other question is to do on page 51, the second to last paragraph. I'm not so sure I understand this. It says that further to the rail rationalization report, the high-speed rail corridor protection study could also take into consideration the protection of the railway right-of-way for a future consolidation of CP and CN. Based on the other reports that we are getting in this session, would that statement become obsolete?
Through the chair to the councillor, the purpose of that statement really is if we're going to be looking at a protection study, it will tell you, quite frankly, is it feasible to put down additional rail? Do we need more right away? And the answer to the CP consolidation may become very clear very quickly if there is no space within that corridor for a future relocation of CP. So my intention of having that paragraph in there was to look at it as part of that. But when you start looking at high-speed rail, the existing 2 CN lines that are through there, I think it's fairly quick math to determine that that right-of-way is not wide enough for CP, CN, high-speed rail, but we just want to confirm that through the study.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm prepared to move it.
Thank you. So Councillor Usher will move. We still have a couple speakers. I have Councillor Park and then Squire and then Hubert.
Second.
Seconded by Hubert.
Thank you. And through the chair to staff, we've seen at this point, there's about 10 municipalities that neighbor us that have come out with resolutions of their council about high-speed rail in the province of Ontario. And I just wonder from a staff perspective, has there been any cross-conversation from staff to staff from either of these municipalities?
Through the chair to the councillor, we have been actually dealing with Oxford County for the last 3 years on this very issue, and working together to ensure that there is transportation is looked at from a broader perspective. This council has passed a number of resolutions about a transportation master plan for all of Southern Ontario. We've been working with our partners through various funding programs to help promote bus linkages to places like Sarnia and Strathroy. There was a press release that we did, I believe, a week and a half ago. So we are talking to all of our partner municipalities that are surrounding it. There is maybe a difference of opinion on high-speed rail versus high-performance rail, but I think we really should leave the technicalities to the environmental assessment. There's nothing that's been determined at this point. There's no corridor that's been determined at this point. We're actually only in the terms of reference for the study itself. So a lot of maybe misconceptions out there of what high-speed rail is and what will be determined through the environmental assessment.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that those conversations are happening, because this is something that's going to impact our region, and as London being a regional leader, we should definitely be having those conversations. I know that many members of council have talked with other councillors in different councils, and I think it's important that we have those staff conversations, so thank you for being proactive on that.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much. My first question is about the parameters were set out by Mr. Collinette in his overview. One of the things that he says is that one of the preferences is central or downtown stations that are connected to rapid transit and local transit networks. So I know that our rapid transit is not going to the VIA station. I think that's accurate at this point in time. So I'm having some difficulty in seeing how we're meeting that requirement. Now, I know people have said in the past, well, we're going to put a station in the Galleria and maybe we'll have some connection, but I'm having struggles finding out how we're integrating high-speed rail into our local transportation network, whether it be the bus, inner bus, whether it be intercity BRT. So can you help me with that?
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. There's an assumption there that high-speed rail will actually stop at the VIA station. Through the environmental assessment, they will have to determine what is the best location for a stop in the downtown. And when you have the VIA rail trains and you have the CN freight rail trains going through, the platforms for high-speed rail are quite different than passenger platforms themselves. So through the environmental assessment, for high-speed rail, they'll have to determine where that location is. And I would hazard to say that they're probably not at the same location as Via Rail passenger service is. The bus rapid transit system does go along Wellington Street, and it's somewhere in that general vicinity in downtown that the high-speed rail would stop. So I think it's a little bit premature at this point to say it does or does not actually interact. We have to see where that station is. And always through the bus rapid transit initiative, we had future ideas that there would be some interaction between the bus and the high-speed rail. The location of that is still to be determined through the high-speed rail. High-speed rail coming through town will mean a lot of improvements along that corridor, potentially as well the improvements to Wellington underpass. So when you think about how that space today interacts, it may not interact in the same manner in the future.
Councillor Square.
Just to clarify, I didn't make an assumption. I was just going by the idea that it would be central downtown station. So it wasn't an assumption. I was reading from the report. And so I prefer not to look at it that way. My second question is this. We presently have via service going from the station. Is it possible, and again, maybe I'm speculating, but I like to answer questions, that we won't be able to upgrade the via service to its own track? Because a lot of people ask me on an ongoing basis or advocate for via to have its own dedicated track to provide better service between London and Toronto for those people who don't take high-speed rail, or to connect with the other municipalities that are not getting high-speed rail. So before I talk to people about that, I'd really like to know, is that something that's possible? Is it off the program now, or what's possible?
Thanks to the chair, to the councillor. That's a level of technical detail that the MTO needs to undertake. At this point, there is no answer to that question. That is something they will have to look at through the environmental assessment.
Councillor Hubert, you indicated you were seconding the motion. Did you also want to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple points. I think what's really significant here is that this project's moving forward, and that there's a broad conversation that's happening both locally but also regionally, and those are the key points. And as Mr. Soldo said, there's a lot of detail that we can't answer those questions yet because we're not at that stage of the process. Kind of has I'm having flashbacks to another transit project that's ongoing in the City of London, where, you know, you start from the broad concepts and you have to keep refining it down. Obviously, we need to make sure that land is available and opportunity is available, but this is also one of those transformational opportunities too. So thank you. I will second.
Thank you. And then I have Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you. And I wasn't going to speak to this part, but I do want to make a couple quick comments. I'm more interested in the next part. I actually think this item and the next item, they actually dovetail together, or should, when we're looking at the high-speed rail issue. And I have to agree with staff. I mean, we've all assumed that the place high-speed rail would stop would be, you know, in the downtown at, you know, the Via station. But there may be other options out there, and obviously, you know, that may come back in future reports. But I'm particularly going to throw out to you that, you know, don't forget the CP track and high-speed rail, because right now what you're talking about passing is our staff, you know, including in the mix, whether or not CP or CP service, rail service, could be on a CN track, or whether there could be an extra track plus the high-speed rail. They're looking at all this. Am I right, through you two staff? That's sort of what this report is. You're looking at everything.
Madam Chair, that is correct. We will be looking for the entire railway corridor, and potentially that could include the addition of more tracks to that high-speed rail corridor.
Which at this point, you should keep all options open. Now, what I wanted to say to you is, we're talking about here, one of the options looking at is moving CP to CN. Well, that opens up a corridor, the CP corridor, so I have to ask through you to staff, because I don't have the maps here and I didn't have time to check. Where does CN goes to Toronto, I'm assuming? CP goes to Toronto or in that area?
Through the chair to the councillor, CN goes both to Kitchener as well as to Toronto, two separate tracks once they leave the city, and CP goes to Toronto.
Okay, so that could be your high-speed corridor existing. And just throwing that out there, and I'm sure our staff or whoever will be looking at all these options. The other option is CP comes right downtown to Richmond. So, you know, again, that could be, you know, boarding, unboarding for the high-speed rail. So there's many, this is a very beginning, it seems to me it's a very complex issue that the experts will have to work out and come back with the best plan at some point in the future. So I just want to mention that to you. The rest of my comments will be when we get to the next item.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. There's no more speakers. We'll put that up. There is another speaker, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and I didn't realize you're at the end of the list, sorry. Just a couple of points I wanted to make about this one. One is, I think when we talk about high-speed rail, a lot of times the focus is on the trip from London to Toronto, and I think that obviously is important, and being able to get there in 73 minutes would be a really big deal, not just for people who are traveling to Toronto occasionally, but for people who are trying to do business in Toronto. Right now, the prospect of getting up at 5:30 in the morning and driving in traffic all the way to the city for morning meetings, most people just do that once before they start making alternative plans, like going in the night before and things like that, that add to costs. I think it's really important that we look at like the job growth rates that have been happening along the corridor. Toronto's job growth rate over the last 17 years has been around 33%, and in London, it's been around 10%. Basically, the further you are away from Toronto, the slower your job growth rate. In Chatham, it's actually been negative, and Windsor is much lower than what we've seen in London. And Kitchener-Waterloo and Guelph, on the other hand, is very similar to what you see in Toronto. It's lower, but it's a lot higher. And I think it shows just how much Toronto is the real driver of economic growth, and we need to be close to it in time. So I think that's part of the issue, and that's part of what Toronto to London high-speed rail would solve. I think it's important that we also recognize how important it is to get to Kitchener and the Kitchener-Waterloo market and connecting the mid-sized cities of southwestern Ontario. We would double our labor market if we could connect Kitchener-Waterloo and London, basically. And be able to get there in 25 minutes from downtown London to downtown Kitchener is just unbelievably, amazingly fast. And you can't get from Byron to the airport in London in 25 minutes driving a car. You know, so I think we have to recognize that this is like a transformational thing. I think sometimes when we talk about projects, we can exaggerate the impact that they would have, but this particular project, this is a really big deal. It could really make things different for people who are going directly to those businesses, markets for business, but then also when we're recruiting and trying to retain people. And this is not just a problem that businesses have, this is a problem that all kinds of institutions have, including the universities and the colleges, where they might recruit one spouse of a partner, a couple, and the other spouse is looking for another job in a different field, and they have to be able to find something in London that's in their area. If you can commute like this really fast to Kitchener or to Guelph or to Toronto, now you can live in London and you can work one person in London, one person somewhere else. And that right now is not workable. You know, you're really limited in how far you can go and what kind of commuting options you've got. So that I think is one that really influences the wider labor market and will be really transformational if we can make those kind of travel times happen. And I think when we're looking at alternatives, there are alternatives that get us to Toronto and there are alternatives that get us to Kitchener-Waterloo. And I think we need to stay focused on the benefits of going to Kitchener-Waterloo. I think even just linking up the technology companies that are happening in London and what's happening in Kitchener-Waterloo, that would be really, really good. And from the perspective of linking up the educational institutions and the healthcare institutions that are along that corridor, also a really big gains to be made there. So I'm really glad to see that it's going forward. I do think that we have to have some kind of downtown station. I'm not sure necessarily right at the VIA station, but a downtown station. And the corridor protection in particular is a really smart thing to be moving forward with.
Thank you. We can now open that up. Yes, Councillor Usher, we've opened the vote, but if you have a comment, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that the public is understanding that this is really just for infrastructure within the City of London. Am I, and perhaps staff would correct me, because I don't want them to think that we are doing the entire route from here to Toronto. We're just looking within the City of London. Am I right?
That's correct.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, there's 5 more items on the consent. I have a feeling that these are pulled just because people want to make comments and ask questions on them and not because they potentially want to vote differently, but we'll continue to proceed through, and maybe next meeting we can just do it all as consent where appropriate. So we'll go to 2.7, and Councillor Squire pulled that first.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see this report. It's obviously something that the public has been asking about over and over again. If you were at Budweiser Gardens for the session there, it seemed like every second or third question was telling us that we needed to look at this before we looked at anything else. So I was really glad to see this come forward, and I'm not, I suppose, surprised. 2 things I wanted to ask. The first is about contribution from either railways or federal government levels on any of the work we're doing at present, whether it be Stanley Street, the Adelaide Street underpass, or what we're doing on Western Road. In other words, are we getting financial contributions for the work we're doing there from either the federal government or the railways? Because I think it's important that people in the City of London understand who's carrying the costs of that, if indeed it's shared or not. And then I have another question.
Thank you. I'll go to staff.
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. In all of those projects is in Western Road, north of Oxford, there is a contribution there from CP. And the 2 other projects that were identified there, our goal is to have that contribution. Usually it's about 15% in that range there that we get in terms of a cost sharing. But they do hold a responsibility as well because it is a rail. So we do go back to them and have a contribution from them.
Councillor Squire?
My second question is, we know we're proceeding with the Adelaide Street underpass. I want to come back to Richmond Street. Now that we know that we're not going to be moving that track, are there any plans as to what we're going to do at the railway at Richmond? Is it something we will be looking at? And the reason, again, I ask this is because I get asked this question probably, if I'm in my community, every other day. So I'm not trying to get anybody to speculate. I just want to know, is there an immediate plan to do something about the railway that crosses Richmond Street?
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. There is a standing council resolution as part of the BRT that was approved that we go back and look at how would we actually deal with RT going across those CP rail lines. So we will be undertaking a feasibility study that will look at a number of different options. We did look at multiple options of how we can actually deal with Richmond and CP, but at the time, if I recall, the discussion was also to look at St. George, let's look at Talbot. There's been other suggestions since that time of how we actually go underneath the CP rail line. So what we're going to do is strictly a feasibility from a technicality perspective, how we can actually deal with those crossings and come back to council with the results of that study.
Thank you very much. Just a quick follow-up then. Timeline on the feasibility study, when we might see that. I appreciate it. That's a very complicated matter and it may take some time.
Through the chair to the councillor, at the present time, we have yet to start that study. We'll have to undertake council or consultant selection process. I don't envision it being done between, anywhere between 6 to 9 months from now.
Councillor Hubert?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the report because I think it lays out clearly what a number of us have said in the past, what has been reported in this chamber. I appreciate the historical context since it goes back to 1853, long before many of us were born. It also outlines some of the changes that have been made. So trains lengths going from 5,000 to 12,000 feet and some of those sorts of things. It also details quite nicely some of the legislative, and I appreciate the Western, the report on the Western province cities, their success or lack thereof. I wonder where that was coming from, and I appreciate that. But Madam Chair, I think I'm really frustrated because at the same time, while we've talked about this, what is being reported here, and I think, I know there's going to be comments probably after this, let's put it to rest. Let's not be throwing it out as a hopeful sign that maybe perhaps we can convince CP or CN to move the rails outside of the City of London. It's really clear in their correspondence. They are not, and I quote, interested. They are led by shareholders, so any dime that they spend in the City of London will reduce the return that shareholders get. And CP will not, we will not be participating, and I quote, in the scoping exercise or in even the development of a terms of reference. Could we get any clearer? In CN's letter, the challenges should never be underestimated. And then they go on to talk about, yeah, we're prepared to participate, but we have 4 criteria, one of which is basically don't let it cost us any money or impact our return on investment. And they go on further to say that in any participation, and I quote their March 1st, 2018 letter, any condition must acknowledge CP's participation shall be on a without prejudice basis, as CP has no desire to locate and will not contribute any funds to either the cost of the feasibility study or any costs associated with future proposal to relocate our infrastructure in the region. And so I'm hearing, I'm sure there's going to be, well, maybe. I heard a candidate who's registered saying we should start by not doing anything on our local transportation system until such time as CP moves their tracks or CN moves their tracks. It's as clear as the ink on the blue page. They are not interested, nor will they contribute. So unless the City of London wants to pony up with $800 to $900 million, it ain't happening. So now we need to work our way forward in terms of building our infrastructure. And obviously the Adelaide Street underpass is a good first step on that. We are taking steps on that, but $50 million or 60, I think it's $50 million or 48 and change is a lot different than $900 million. So, Madam Chair, I think it's pretty clear where we're at. I thank staff for making it crystal clear. And in fact, I'm going to email this out to a couple members of the bar who I had to give them a bit of a constitutional lesson on the history of Canada a few weeks ago on the potential of moving the railroad tracks. I won't speak again. Thank you.
On just this issue or all day? Councillor Usher, then
I got a response to that.
Councillor Usher, and then
I thank you for the instigation.
Councillor Usher, go ahead.
I just want to agree with Councillor Hubert. Of course, he thinks that I was around in 1853, and I really wasn't, even though he says none of us were around. Just had to say that. I wish we just put this thing to rest. I've been here 18 years, and I think that this must be at least the 4th time this has come up. but I think it's crystal clear now that we can't do it, they're not going to allow it, and we're just wasting our time. And I think that our reputation is at stake. In addition to the letters that staff has written, I have spoken to several CP people at FCM about this. And the answer has always been the same. Exactly what is being said here, a little bit more diplomatic. And I think that most of what is said here is being diplomatic to say that, look, it's no, forget about it, stay away from us. I think all they're trying to say is that, well, if you want to look at it, we'll provide somebody to help you out, but it's still no. And I wish we would just take that for an answer and move on with what we need to do based on that. So having said that, there's another part to this that I've never been able to get a correct answer, and it has to do with timing. And we may not have the answer here, but I've brought this up before, not in question form, but in statement form, because I've heard it. And I just perhaps we may want to check it, because I don't even know if we could do anything about it. My understanding is that, and this is from over the years that I've been dealing with this and the railway crossing, is that when the railway first started, the Railway Act allowed railways to create delay of 5 minutes maximum. And that may have gone up to 7 minutes, I don't know. My problem here is that, has that been changed? And the reason I'm asking is because I've been parked out on Adelaide Street for 22 minutes while that train crosses. And part of this was because my understanding was that initially, years and years and years ago, the trains used to be 5,800 feet long. Then they went to 7,800 feet. Then they went to 10,800 feet. And now, most of them, at least 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 o'clock in the morning, they seem to be closer to 12,800 feet. And that is what is causing the delay of the 22 minutes. Somebody said they might even be 14,800 feet at certain time. I don't know that. My question here is really, are they breaking the rules? Are they breaking the law? And even if they are, I don't know how you get around it, but I thought that this might be something that we may really want to look at, and it may give us a little bit of, I don't want to use the word negotiating room, but discussion room. So may I ask through you, Madam Chair, to staff, if they're aware of this and if it's something that they may consider looking into if they are not aware?
You can ask. I'm not sure if our staff have that expertise or could look into it and get back to us in regards to regulations on the length of delay. If you have that information, would like to share it, we'd be happy to hear it. And if not, we can maybe find out offline or bring it back later.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. The delay that they can actually be stopped is, I believe, 5 minutes. I don't have the information offhand. Mr. McCray may want to add something to that as well. You've asked the question that kind of opens the door for me to provide you some other information. We are monitoring both of those locations. You may have noticed a article in the paper a while back about the system that we've put in place both at Adelaide and at Richmond Street itself. So that system allows us to monitor the number of times the trains go through those locations. It also allows us to monitor the time that the intersection is blocked as well. And it's information that we've provided to council in the past. The crossings at Richmond, they are truly crossings at Richmond. Their trains are going through. Crossings at Adelaide, there's the crossings that go through Richmond, but also because they have their yard right there, they have a considerable shunting of their trains back and forth. And just to provide you with some high-level information here, between April 30th and yesterday, we've been monitoring the number of trains that go by. So for every 5 trains that go by at Adelaide, there's 2 trains that go by at Richmond. So that tells you the level of shunting that occurs at the Adelaide yard itself, and why it's really important to have that grade separation at Adelaide, because it's not just for the passing trains, it's for the trains to go through. When you look at the average of the delays, they are actually less than 5. It's about 5 minutes at both of those. There obviously isn't any average trains that take longer than that. So our goal, so at Adelaide over 28-day period, there was 560 blockages. In the same time frame, over 28-day period, there's 224 at Richmond. So we're monitoring that. We have the system in place. Our goal, as I've indicated in the report itself, is to provide that information to drivers ahead of time so they know if they're coming up at that location, that they will have the opportunity to detour if they need be, or at least they would know how long it's going to be there, and they would know when it would occur. So the signage would tell them, in 2 minutes, there's going to be a train crossing Richmond Street. It would also get pushed out to the Ways Act, agreement that this committee approved, I believe, 1 or 2 times ago at CWC. So our goal is to provide better information. It doesn't solve the blockage, but it does provide better information for the traveling public and potentially allow for detouring. Once Adelaide is in place and people know that there might be that blockage in Richmond, they may also make that detour. So we are tracking the information, and that is helping us in our discussions with CP as we move forward on the Adelaide grade separation.
Well, thank you very much for that information. You said at the beginning, through you, Madam Chair, about the 5 minutes. Have we ever approached CN with this to say that, hey, you're taking up a lot more than 5 minutes at any of these tracks at all? Do you know if we have?
I was referring to the CP line at Adelaide, and we have had numerous discussions with them on this matter.
Well, it's almost seemed to me that they don't care about the delay. And I feel that, to me, what is happening is that if it was me and I owned it, it would give me a bad name. And to me, what it's doing is giving CP a bad name. And I just wonder if they know how we feel about that. And I'm thinking in terms of helping out to solve the problem. For example, with the underpass. Maybe they should be going 50-50 instead of 15-85. That's where I'm coming from. Anyway, I'm going to move on with my other questions. My other question comes on page 64, where you talk about the different relocation, help modernize noise, vibration, safety concern, traffic delays, along with risk of dangerous goods transport. But you don't mention anything about greenhouse gas emission. And there's an enormous amount of emission that happens when we have these delay. We don't consider that as an advantage, disadvantage? Through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to the Chair, to the Councillor. Actually, that was something we considered. Further in the report, we speak to providing or going after funding underneath the National Trade Corridors Fund. And as part of our business case there, we put together the business case of all the delay and what that does from an air emissions perspective. So we have actually even modeled that at the CP crossing.
And my last question for today, Madam Chairman, it follows some of the other questions that came up. We do identify some of the crossings, but we have all of these crossings, and it seems to me that over my years, we've been very slow in relieving this congestion. In fact, if I remember rightly, the only one that we have done was Hale Trafalgar over the years by putting the overpass there. That was the only relief that we've been able to accomplish. Now we are talking about Adelaide. But there are others that if we had an underpass or an overpass, it would help. Maybe not as much as places like Richmond and Adelaide. I don't see anywhere where we put these in a priority format. We do say that, through you again, Madam Chair, we do say that we do talk a lot about Richmond, and that's a different category, it seems to me. But we do put Adelaide in a priority scenario, and that's fine. But I wonder if there should not be a time, and maybe now is the time, that we should look at some of the other crossings and say, and these are secondary and tertiary and so on, that we should be considering, because if we never identify them, they will never happen. And that was one of our problems with Adelaide. We'd keep talking about it, but we never identify it until a few years back. We began to identify it. And the same with Richmond. We always talk about Richmond, but until BRT came along, we always feel that it was impossible, and now we still feel that way. But I just think that there are others that are less interfering, I'll use that term, but would be helpful if traffic could just keep moving under or over, and it would help with congestion in other areas. So I just wonder if we ever consider giving a secondary and tertiary set of crossings that we would like to modify.
Actually, through the chair to the councillor, this has always been on top of mind of staffs. I'll refer you to page 59. Page 59, in background reports related to this, council back in 2005 developed the priority settings for future rail grade separations, and we've actually updated that that list of what is the highest priority grade separations in the city, I believe at least once in the last 5 years, because I can remember since I've been here. So we can definitely bring that back to council at a future date, but we do look at the warrants of when grade separation is required and where, and then we look at then implementing that through development charges process or our budgeting process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. I have Councillor Park, Armstrong, then Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really glad that we did go down this path because we got a lot of really good information that can really help focus where we go forward on this. And I would say that the best place to focus is on the most cost-efficient way of mitigating this impact to our transportation network. And I think that the recommendation of staff to go forward and seek opportunities to reduce these conflicts through grade separations are the words I'm looking for right now.
Call it a tunnel.
We could call it a tunnel.
Let's call it a tunnel.
Call it a tunnel. So looking at the rail safety and improvement program, I think that that's something that we should significantly be focusing on, recognizing that there's huge impacts along Clark Road, also Adelaide and elsewhere throughout the city. And I think that there are large opportunities for cost effectiveness on this front. And I think that we need to think about this broader conversation. This isn't just a London conversation when you're talking about moving rail lines. It's a regional conversation. This is pushing a rail outside of our own boundaries and onto someone else's issue, onto someone else's docket, and creating bigger problems, agricultural conflicts, and etc. So I agree with my colleagues that the conversation about moving rails outside the city of London, I think that that conversation should end, and what we should do is focus on creating opportunities to alleviate the conflict that rail does provide to our city. Recognizing the fact that we've had long conversations for a long time over this, I think putting it to bed is the best foot forward here. And I think that we really have to think about the reality and work within the reality of today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to, I'm glad we have gotten all this information. My position earlier was that I wanted to look at the opportunity of putting the CP operations onto CN track, and I was informed by reliable sources that that could be done within a year. Now, what we're dealing with, obviously, with CN and CP, to me, we're going to them, and it's like going to Coca-Cola and saying, Coca-Cola, would you allow us to put some Pepsi in your vending machines? The answer would be, we're not interested. That's a no. And that's what we're doing. CP, I think, can see there may be some benefits to them. CN sees none. They are complete competitors. So I didn't expect that our staff would come back and that there would be a marriage between these two corporations. That I didn't expect, but at least we've got the information now, and there's a starting point here. Now, a couple quick points, or first quick question through you to staff. How many CP and CN trains go through the city each day? 24-hour period, roughly.
Are we working the numbers that you presented earlier? 564 and 283 over 30 days. So 900 in a month divided by 30 days, about 30 a day. You can check my math with your engineering skills.
To the chair, it's in that range. These numbers are presented before were CP trains. I do not have with me the CN trains that go through the city.
Okay, I'm going to go from memory because I dealt with the Hale Street thing many years ago. It's probably double CN, what comes through London. Now, the thing is, first, for me, we need relief in the downtown. We don't need these trains, CP, in blocking the tracks. I see it having long-term out, big impacts on the BRT, huge impacts. And you can build the Adelaide Street overpass, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem of people being stuck there down the road. So one thing I wondered if our staff looked into is, or could they look into, is there an opportunity to sit down, one, and look at having the CP trains on the CN track whenever possible, when it wouldn't impact the CN operation. So that's one thing I'd like to know, because if we could reduce CP trains by 50% or 75% on their corridor, that would go a long way. So so my first position would be I'd like to see CP on CN track totally, but in the interim, let's have a look at putting CP whenever possible onto the CN track. Can that be done? Now, I'm sure CN will say, no, it can't be done because we don't want to talk about it, but I'm looking at page 64, and this will be a question through you to staff. It says, if a municipality cannot reach an agreement with a railway company on the relocation of railway lines, and we're not really talking about lines, I was suggesting that they could share existing lines, but railway lines, it permits an application to the CTA for an order to carry out an accepted plan. No, we don't have a plan. No one's come up with a plan yet, but we can apply, we can ask. And so that's an opportunity I think that maybe we need to explore. That if CN and CP are not willing to sit down at a table and work something out to alleviate congestion now and in the future in the downtown, then maybe we should ask the CTA to order them to come up with a plan and implement a plan. So I don't see this, I call it a diversion of all or some of the CP traffic onto wherever possible onto the CN track. I'd like to know whether that might work. If we could reduce it by 50 to 75%, that would go a long way. Down the road, and perhaps not affecting the BRT. I hope future councils don't end up being faced with a debate about the tunnel all over again. I hope that doesn't happen. That is a very big expense, so we need to try to avoid that. How many, through you to staff, how many million was that again for the tunnel?
So you have a couple of questions there. You want to know the cost of the tunnel. I'll give staff a second to look that up. You want to know if the city or the CTA can compel the rail lines to share. And then my question based on the councillor's comments, when I read 64, it looks like in new applications and not existing. So can you clarify that as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start and I'll probably flip this over to Mr. Soldo to fill in a few blanks as well. With respect to potentially diverting some part of CP's traffic onto CN's lines, there did not seem to be receptivity from CN to accept any of their competitors' traffic. Operationally, I think for both companies, that may be quite problematic as well in order to decide when they would move trains back and forth between that infrastructure. CN's been quite clear that they would like to maintain their corridor for their own use. With respect to the order, you can make an application to the CTA to implement an accepted plan. So that would be a plan where we have developed a strategy in terms of relocation. It is an acceptable plan to the place to which it is being relocated. And that does not mean that there would not be there's a requirement for the railway to pay, so it would still continue to be at no net cost to the railway. So the city would be fully responsible for both the capital costs, and I think it's important to note that railways typically also want municipalities to pay ongoing operating cost differences as well. So if there's more trackage or they have more travel time to their track, you pay that as well. And I'm sorry, I forgot the third question.
The cost of the tunnel for Richmond Street separation, do we recall that from previous estimates?
Off the top of my head, I don't have it exactly. It started, I believe, at 90 million and ended up being closer to 200. Mr. Stoll, do you have anything you may want to add to the CTA discussion?
Thank you. As Ms. Shear has indicated, freight operations are based on the needs of the customers. And to move, every other train or, say 50% of the CP traffic, first, I'd have to point out that CP has customers in London that they need to service. So they would still need to get there. So the scheduling of freight operations is very complex. To move any sort of traffic from CP to CN would require basically an integrated operational system where they would know when that capacity occurs. And because it's all based on the needs of their customers, that would be extremely difficult. They have, a lot of difficulty just scheduling via trains. They have to stop on the CN traffic lines themselves and wait for the freight traffic to go through. So the complexity of moving any or portions of a CP to CN is extremely difficult, and CN's been very adamant that they are already at capacity along this corridor.
Thank you. Councillor, I will go back to you. You did use up 5 minutes. We do have, and that wasn't including staff time, we do have 4 more items in another meeting in 25 minutes. And I will let you reflect on the flavor of the committee thus far. So if you would like to take last final comments or have another question, I'd certainly entertain those. And I know that the media is often available after the meeting if you have other points that you would like to make to the public.
I'll try to make it quick. I guess the thing is, CN is uncooperative, but the fact is we're talking $200 million down the road. Councillor Squire, I'm sure, doesn't like the idea of that tunnel looming in the future. We're talking $30 million for Adelaide. We're going to resurrect old reports where you're going to find there's 2 or 3 more structures that have to be built on the CP line. So we really need to, I'd like to see this sent back so that they can have a look, unless they feel that they've covered all their bases in this report now. I'd like to see this sent back so that we can get some answers to a couple of these questions. Don't forget, the decisions that you make and what go to council next is going to impact this city for the next 100 or years. So we have an opportunity right now to perhaps come up with an innovative solution that will make a difference to our traffic flows in the downtown and have a major impact on the BRT. Like I say, I don't want to see $30 million on the Adelaide if not necessary. 200 million or more on an underground tunnel. I mean, start to add it up. Now, I know that while there are some difficulties and costs involved technology-wise to integrate the system, but within London, we need to integrate the system. I'll answer your question because I think I know the answer. Both CP and CN only have 1 customer in London currently. That was my understanding. So they're only picking up freight from 1 customer each. So there's not a lot of shunting and stuff going on. I also want to point out, if you look in that map on page 63, that they actually, I believe, to the right of that map, it says New Yard. That's where they assemble their trains now, I believe,
Councillor
not
Toronto.
in downtown London. So I would like to see this sent back, but maybe at council, if the committee doesn't want to send it back to get more information and keep the issue alive, then I'll try to move that at council.
Thank you, Councillor. It's certainly your own prerogative to make motions that you would like to make at council. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question that might affect the finances of the railroads. They're doing shunting here in an urban area, and that has to be less safe than shunting trains in a rural area. And I recall there being a situation where a train had derailed and in a city, and their insurance wasn't able to pay for the event, so the municipality ended up being stuck with the bill. And so my question then to staff is, do we know that the railways have adequate insurance for doing the work they are doing here? Because if not, we should insist on that. And if it turns out to be a lot more, that might incentivize them to do that work elsewhere.
Councillor, I don't know if our staff have that answer. I'm going to give them the opportunity to let you know, but I don't think that's within the municipal lens. I think that's a federal issue, but I'll look to our staff to see if they do have the answer first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is indeed a federal issue, as they are a federally regulated agency, and we are not privy to that sort of proprietary corporate information as to their relationship with the federal government on insurance.
Thank you. I know that this is a complex issue. I'm going to make a couple comments from the chair, mostly so that Deputy Mayor Hubert doesn't have to speak again, because he promised me he wouldn't. It is a complicated issue because it involves multiple levels of government. So we need to keep in mind what is within the municipal realm and what are the municipal consequences and what requires some work at other levels of government. And I think at this point, from my point of view, we have exhausted what we need to do from a municipal point of view. I think if there's further work to be done, it's to be done at other levels of government, and any one of us as individuals could start initiating that work by connecting with those members that are responsible for that decision making. And so I think that's the next logical step, if a councillor wanted to bring something forward, is to do it separate and in that way. But I am sensing from this committee and from the municipal point of view, we have exhausted what we can do on this issue. So I'm going to look for any final speakers. Everyone has spoken, except for Councillor Helmer, who doesn't look like he's indicating to speak. It looks like Councillor Usher will move it. Deputy Mayor Hubert will second it. Last call for final speakers on this. Seeing none, we'll put that on the floor. I do apologize. If anyone didn't read, that also includes receiving the communication from Mr. Brock, who I know is here today, so that was part of the discussion, was to include that communication.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I do apologize for not noting that ahead of time. We did receive a letter from Mr. Brock. It is on the added agenda. It has been received. And that concludes that item. So we'll move to 2.8. And I do apologize. Was it Councillor Squire? Did you pull 2.8 or was it another member?
No, I'm going to pass because I know you have another meeting. I can get the information I need from staff, so I'm gonna waive the rest of my items.
Okay.
I thought I 2.9, 2.10, and 2.12.
Fair enough. So I'm going to have to go through them, I think, one by one anyway. I'm going to look for really quick comments that you feel that you need to make in public or debate. We'll go to Councillor Van Holst on 2.8.
Thank you very much. I had a couple of things, but I'm just going to ask about one. On page 86, we're talking about a space heater and temperature settings policy being developed. Now, I know that for some people, it's the temperature in their workspace is the source of ongoing trauma. And are we actually going to tell people they can't use space heaters or force these temperatures? Is this going to prevent people from coping with the environment? I'm wondering what that item is in next steps on page 86.
Through the chair, this is the practice being developed by facilities right now. It will come forward to Human Resources for final implementation. And essentially, it is looking at making sure that we are fully in compliance with how we use space heaters. So we're going to be balancing basically personal comfort, but also make sure that we're using the right types of equipment to do so. And anytime we don't have to use, especially the less energy efficient type space heaters, that'll be a priority as part of that document. So it'll be something that is has the best interest of staff, but at the same time is going to be very wise from an energy efficiency perspective.
Thanks, I'm satisfied with that response.
Thank you. So you can't move it. Councillor Usher can move it, and Councillor Park can second it. We'll put that up on screen. I know that that will be looked at with the gender lens in mind, because I know that there are studies out there which very clearly demonstrate a different temperature for both men and women. Mm-hmm.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, Councillor Squire indicated that he had pulled 2.9, 2.10, and 2.12, but was happy to ask his questions offline. But I think that there was interest from another member on 2.12. Can you please indicate to me if you have an interest in not doing these together, or is it okay? We'll put all three matters on for the next vote. We'll start with 2. Councillor Park will move it. We'll start with anything on 2.9. Any questions or comments? Usher first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to 2.9, I won't ask many questions. I will just say, I had a brief discussion with Mr. Stanford, and what I would like to do is, and I don't want to put Mr. Stanford on his spot, but I'm disappointed in not Mr. Stanford, not us. I'm disappointed in the status of the different activities that we're having here, because I really was hoping that some of these things would have been cleared up this year before I depart. And I don't mean the earth, I mean the chambers. I'm going to be frank. I thought that we'd have something on the blue box, for example, and I got a little concerned that that's not going to come until December, and I have a little concern that we're going to have a whole new contract with Miller because of the delay, and not on our part, but the delay in activities from the province. They opened this up for us last year to make comments, and we sent in all of our comments with the, from my perspective, the anticipation that we'd have had some positive situation at this point in time. So I read the report, but maybe I'm being a little too sticky about it, and my big disappointment is that everything is, after today, I'm not going to hear about this again when I'm not on council. So I just wonder if, through I could ask, and through this chair, if I could ask Mr. Stanford to just give us a synopsis and let me feel a little bit better about all this timeline.
Thank you. I will let Mr. Stanford make a couple of comments on that. I think you'll be pleased to know that we fully expect some of these items to come back in the next month or two, and I'll let Mr. Stanford expand on that.
Through the chair, I think all municipalities in Ontario are actually disappointed with what transpired. There was a lot of progress being made with industry towards developing a negotiated plan that was going to be submitted on February 15th to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. But when that date approached, it was determined basically that the request of the minister was not being met in the documentation from from industry. So as a result, the idea of a transition program that would have allowed municipalities to receive greater payments sooner than later is not going to occur at this point in time. And I've got to emphasize this point in time. We've been on this roller coaster for many years. And so seems to be a short-term challenge that we're dealing with. The province does have laws that industry will have full responsibility for the recycling program by 2022. What we don't have is the teeth behind that and how we're going to get there. That is a document that basically now has been shelved until later this summer or into the fall when we'll hear more details on that. The impact on London really is one of a financial impact, because with industry taking more responsibility for the recycling program, there is going to be more money placed in the hands of municipal council. So at this point in time, we have no indication on when that's going to occur. As soon as we know, you'll be the first to know, because we're quite anxious too, because it does hinder a number of our longer term financial plans that will be subject of further reports this year.
Well, that helps a little bit. But in the report also, it talks about, if I remember rightly, it talks about our paper recycling, that we're not having the market for it anymore, both within Ontario and the United States, and even in China, where some of it was going, because China is putting a halt on our recycling. What's going to happen to our recycling process with respect to paper and cardboard and so on, if we're not going to be able to send it to these places? I wonder if Mr. Stanford has any answers for that.
Through the chair, yes, the recycling challenges right now are growing with the end markets, as the councillors noted. There's been a lot of coverage on this over the last probably 6 months, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure it was in a Civic Works report, so you had the same details that have been filtering through different media right now. This is actually a worldwide challenge that's going on right now with the situation with the end markets in China, the largest newspaper and paper market in the world right now, where they've put in very, very tight restrictions. And in fact, they are at times not accepting any recycled material or material to be recycled in that area. The same is actually occurring in India right now. We've seen things like this before. Recycling is part of a global network. And in many ways, what we're seeing here is one of the reasons why municipalities really want industry to be much more involved. They have much better control on what goes on worldwide situations than we do. So for the next little bit, yes, there's going to be a struggle in the end markets. Material continues to move, but it's moving at a lower price. And in fact, what we're seeing is almost weekly, I'm getting updates where things are changing in Ontario. You've got the most up-to-date information in this particular report, but I can tell you within a week or two, there could be additional information. It's moving that quickly. So at this point in time, all I can really say is that we've got a reasonable handle on what's going on. Our current contractor, Miller Waste Systems, is doing a very good job at moving material and finding new markets for it. We're in contact constantly with our colleagues in other areas of Ontario to see if they're finding solutions. And as you can imagine, they release some information, but they're very, very cautious on the end markets that they're finding, because like everything too, you do get a little protective of that. But collectively, things are not as good as they were last year, but they could actually get worse. And these are the things that we're watching. It is all part, though, of what goes on in the recycling field. In fact, when I look at back 10 years ago, 2009 was probably one of the worst years on record for recycling revenues. And since then, we've actually had a reasonably long period of time of growth. So as much as things are not looking good right now, it is part of a whole global network, and it is cyclical. It may not be good today or in the next few months, but it will rebound as it traditionally has.
My last question is to do with the producer's responsibility. We get a certain amount of money from the producers today. We were gearing towards 100%, I believe. Will that just stay at that level for now, or will it fall back? In other words, are they going to renege on that responsibility, or are they going to look forward to taking on 100% at some point in time based on government's direction? Got my question?
Through the chair, in the long term, probably 2022, industry will have to pay 100% of the cost of recycling. Between now and then, municipalities each year fight for our 50%. As much as is written in law, industry does what industry is best at. They try to find every way to lower the cost that they pay because it increases their profit or lowers their cost. So each year, revenues are something that municipalities collectively work on to and battle with industry to get the final agreed payment. As part of that, and the way the solution has been provided to municipalities for years, is that we actually work on a rolling average. So a loss this year, which is what we're going to occur on our recycling revenues, industry will have to cover half of that loss. So our report indicates right now that the best available information is we will be about $1 million shy of our budget for 2018. Industry will recover and pay for 500,000 of that loss, but they pay for that over a 3-year period. As a result, what we do is we work with our finance staff to make sure that we can handle these budget arrangements, and we report out twice per year now on all those implications. But to repeat, we've been through this before. 2009 was a bad year when we put in place measures to reduce the impact as best as possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you very much. I have a couple comments. The first one is I think we should be racing for the opportunities here. Anytime changes like this happen, there are big opportunities. I know that, for instance, there's ways to turn newsprint into ethanol. Cellulose can be made into ethanol fuel as well. And just last week at council, I brought forward a technology that could take the greatest cost of producing ethanol out of the picture, which is creating heat. So there might be a chance for us to pick up some of these recycling duties ourselves and then be able to provide that as a service outside the city as well in order to generate some revenue. That's my first comment. The second one, and there's a lot of great work in this report as well, by the way, thank you, but we are rushed, so I'm going to get to a point on page 116. We're talking about the green bin costs. I'm not necessarily a fan of this. I'd rather see $4.5 million go to something like housing. But looking at the greenhouse gas reduction, I don't know that this is really a meaningful figure here. Reduction in greenhouse gases really has significance when we're talking about not using fossil fuels. But in terms of food, all food is a biofuel essentially. So whether we put this in the landfill, and if we put it in the landfill, it will produce some greenhouse gases, but that exact same amount would be produced if I were to put it in my compost bin, whether I were to eat it, whether I were to send it to a place like Orgo World who turned it into fuel and then burned it. It's the same thing. So I don't see that there's a reduction in greenhouse gases in this program. Certainly we'd be diverting the 12 to 14,000 tons of mass, but in fact, in terms of greenhouse gases, a green bin program would be producing more greenhouse gases because we'll be having to burn the fossil fuels in order to run the trucks, unless, of course, we're able to produce our own natural gas when we get to that point. So I don't know that I'd prefer it not to have these figures in here for greenhouse gas reduction. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't sure that I heard a question in there, just a comment. Am I correct?
Those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hewart?
Just a quickie. Mr. Stanford, can you remind me, I know we talked about it some time ago, but going from the black garbage bags to the clear garbage bags in terms of sort of the psychological encouragement for people to be more aware of what they're putting into their garbage and moving more of it to the recycling. Is that a subject, a live subject, or is it pretty much done?
Through the chair, we do not have any specific council direction to look at a program such as that. There has been discussion at Civic Works Committee on that matter. What we are doing, though, as part of our 60% waste diversion action plan, we are looking at all sort of policies and practices that are used by other municipalities that are new in many respects, that are helping to achieve the higher diversion rates. Some communities like town of Markham, or actually city of Markham, just north of Toronto, for example, has put in place a clear bag program, and they do claim that it has been very beneficial in helping both recycling and their organics program.
Madam Chair, let me be very expeditious. I'd like to move a motion to that effect, that be included into our plan. And I could give a bit of background on it because I know that some of the rural municipalities require that. But it's really interesting because I was the victim of it because I went to landfill at my cottage, and it had black bags, and they were all over me. And then I realized as I had the clear bag, how much more conscious I was of what was in it, and I found myself picking through it to remove certain items that should be going into other streams. So bad boy on me, but I think it actually is might be an effective strategy for us and a very low cost one. It's just a matter of people buying a different kind of bag. So could I move that motion? Let's deal with this one and then I'll add it quickly.
I was going to ask if we could just do that under additional business, just because I asked them to
Absolutely,
group
I'll do it
together
under
as consents.
Good idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seconded by Councillor Usher. So if there's no other comments on this matter, we can put it up for a vote. This does not include Councillor Hubert's motion. This is just the consents.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, there's no scheduled items, no items for direction. Deferred matters list, we can get do we need a motion on that? Yes, a motion to receive the deferred matters list, and then I'll move to additional business. A motion to receive by Councillor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Usher. Comment on deferred matters, Councillor Usher?
Madam Chair, I went through this deferred matters list, and I really do think that we need to go through this. Maybe not right now, but somebody need to go through this. And this, first of all, half of this stuff I don't understand. I think it was written so long ago in such a context that maybe even the staff is confused about some of this stuff. Maybe we need to just put this in different language and let it come back to us, because I know that one of them we have on our report today, but some of the others, it just sounds so obsolete to me that I'm not so sure why it's there, to be honest with you. And I wonder what's, perhaps the clerk could advise me, what's the best way of approaching this? Because we're going to keep having it here, and I don't know how many of us go through this deferred matters list. I've been through it, but half of it I don't understand why it's there. I'm not even sure what we're asking for. And, you know, we keep moving the date from one to the other, and I look at staff and I say to myself, why are we creating this work for them? So I'm not so sure what's the answer, but I think that we need to go through this and put it in different languages.
I can help you with that, and then I can turn over to the clerk in case I miss anything, Councillor. The items that we dealt with today that were on the list will be coming off the list after this meeting, and I would be happy to allocate time at the next Civic Works meeting to go through and review these matters. Everything that is on here are things that Council has directed staff to do. So if we wanted to make changes, there's certainly an opportunity to do that, but it would have to be passed by Council to remove it from staff's to-do list.
So I appreciate what you're saying, Madam Chair. However, I believe that if I've been through this and I don't grasp it, or I feel that it shouldn't be there, I feel like it's taking up staff times unnecessarily, I believe that we should be looking into it. I don't believe that we should rush out of here and just pass it. I'm not going to approve this. I'm not going to approve receiving it, because I just don't think, I would be ashamed to show this to somebody outside and say, this is our deferred matters, this is what we are coming up with, this is what we're asking staff to do. So we ought to go through it today, or I'm not going to approve it. I'm not going to join in with the rest of the group to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There is another meeting which started 2 minutes ago, which I'm to chair in another room, and that might be some of the push on moving forward with some of this quickly. There are members who are sitting around here who are expected in the other meeting. I'm happy to go through the list. I go through it every time with staff. I initially requested the list. I can tell you everything that is on here is the exact language that Council approved at Council meetings. So I do think, I agree with you, Councillor, that it warrants us going through ensuring that these are all still priorities and things we want staff to continue investing time in. But I'm going to look to the rest of the committee to see if they wish to do that today and have a lengthy discussion, or if they would like to allocate time at the next Civic Works meeting. And I would respect your vote however you vote on receiving this list. And I understand what you're saying, absolutely. I'll look to Councillor Park.
Thank you. I think that there's merit in having a longer conversation, but I don't think today's the day. I think there should be a conversation about what aspects of this should be chunked out and what shouldn't be. So if we want to defer this to the next Civic Works meeting, or recognizing that this list will come back at that point also. So in your hands, Chair.
So there's a motion to receive. I'm looking to the committee to see if people are happy to receive the report. Okay, can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Brown, seconded by Hubert. And absolutely, I respect anyone's vote on this decision and where some of those thought processes are coming from. We'll put that up on the screen.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 5-1.
Okay, I'll now look for any additional business. Sorry, there's a 5.2 on the added. We'll do that first, and then we'll do additional business. Are we going to move 5.2? Moved by Hubert, seconded by Park. Any discussion? It's the 6th report of the Cycling Advisory Committee. If there's no discussion, we'll put that up for a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. Is there any additional business? Councillor Hubert.
Sorry, Chair, so my motion, I'd like to add a motion with respect to clear garbage bags, that the motion would be as follows: that staff investigate and implement clear garbage bags as part of our waste reduction strategy.
Do you have a seconder?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Usher.
Madam,
Oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, he said, my colleague said, and implement. I don't think I want to give the direction to implement, to consider maybe, but they may come back and say it's not the right time, so.
Can we all amend, investigate and bring back a potential implementation strategy as part of the waste reduction? Use the right language, clerk. Your project is called
60% waste diversion action plan.
Beautiful language.
So Councillor Park indicated that she would second that. I'm looking for other discussion, then I'm going to turn over the chair to Councillor Park and make some comments myself. If there's no one else to comment first.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. This was something that I brought up at this committee, I think 3.5 years ago, in my first term, or my first year, my first term on this committee. It was something that I was certainly interested in exploring, and I remember at that time having a discussion and receiving some cautions about some of the privacy that could be implicated if we move to that type of a system. So I have concerns about that. I would be happy to have the committee receive a report back so that you could fully consider the information, but I don't know that I would be supportive today of an implementation strategy. I think that we do need to hear what those considerations are, what work has already been done in this area, so that we could further look at what else has to be done. I agree with my colleagues that there's work to do and significant work to do in reducing our waste. We've addressed that as a committee. We've confirmed that as council. Our staff have brought that to us time and time again. We know that it's at the individual level. We know it's at the industrial level. We know it's within the commercial sector as well. But at this time, I can't support that motion. I think if the mover and seconder would be looking at just getting some information back, I would be happy to do that. But the implementation strategy is a little bit too far for me without us having the information and having considered what the implication is to Londoners. And we know that we have a lot of issues with privacy and security. And so although this seems on the surface like a great way to look at reducing our waste and hold people accountable through their neighborhoods, I think we really need to be careful about what those other pieces are before we force this on Londoners.
Beg pardon, I forgot I was the chair. Deputy Mayor.
Chair, my motion says potential, so I think it'll cover my colleague's concern.
All right. Any further speakers on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
And giving the chair back to Councillor Ridley.
I think just in time to adjourn if there's no additional business. Motion to adjourn by Deputy Mayor Huber, seconded by Councillor Squire. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you to all of our staff, colleagues, and special guests here today.